Concorla. There are lots of threads to this budget, but there's no tapestry woven today. I'd like to start, I suppose, by looking at those threads that are very positive, that you'd welcome. Because it's important that we do get that balance in politics, recognising where something's done right. I was glad to see the relatively significant increase in overseas aid funding. I think it's critical for this country, particularly when we're in receipt now of £9.5 billion funds, or whatever the latest figure is, in corporation tax, which largely comes from our location as the domestic centre of companies that deal in the Europe, Middle East and Africa. We, more than anyone else, have an obligation to meet those development goals, to set to 1.7% of our income to overseas aid, and we're nowhere near there yet. But if we repeated this again next year, and the year after, and the year after that, and the year after that, and really went for that, I think it would serve our country well, and would say something, would back up what we did by signing the Sustainable Development Goals in New York, negotiated by an Irish civil servant. I welcome that increase, and I look and hope that we can repeat it again next year and again afterwards. I also welcome the investment in people with disabilities. And it's hard sometimes to judge, what's the clever, the right economic thing. A lot of our money, if you look back the last 20, 30 years, a lot of our money that we spent on health, education, social welfare. And that actually, I think, in the long run, can really strengthen an economy. We want an economy which is not just about how much can you earn so that you can flaunt consumption, but how can we create a society where our economy supports those who have to care? And in doing so, improve all our environment, all our social society. That my security is enhanced when your security is also provided for, and that our country and our society and our community benefits when we support and look after the weakest among us. I welcome that spend. Similarly, I welcome the investment, putting aside money in the rainy day fund. I've been there in government in times when we had incredibly difficult choices to make, €6 billion cuts to make. I would love at that time had we had €2 million that we could turn to in the proper economic approach, that you do go counter-cyclical. You have that fund which you're allowed to spend within the European Union, which I understand this rainy day fund will allow us to expand spending at the time when the economy is contracting. I'm worried, I'll be honest, that in this time of phenomenal growth, 7.5% growth is remarkable by any international comparison, that we're still not going into surplus, that we are still allocating an additional $1 billion now next year into health, and I don't dispute the need for health spending, but the fact that we're seemingly unable to actually get to a surplus when you would think in this circumstances we would, is of concern. But for that reason, I welcome the investment in the rainy day fund. I also, when I read it first and when I heard the Minister speak, said to myself, well, some of the investments in education, again, were the sort of thing we were looking for. The increase in provision for capitation fees, so that parents don't have, so that education, Donncha O'Malley's vision is actually carried out in full, that you don't have parents who are wondering, how can I afford the books, how can I afford the trip? But then you look at it and really count the numbers and do the maths on it and realise actually what's been provided for is not enough. It's so many threads, but not, as I said, forming a tapestry by actually concentrating spending in a certain area. I wish we'd gone further in education, particularly in that payment, so that parents don't have to pay for primary and secondary school education. And similarly, when I saw the £150 million, I think wasn't it, investment announced for third level education, I said, yes, that's not enough, but at least a step in the right direction. But only again when you do the maths afterwards and realise, because the numbers of third level students is rising so dramatically, there's no real increase. And that we need to do. We need for our economy to stop the slide of our universities down the international league tables, and I understand the main reason for that is because of the massive change in the staff-pupil ratio in our third-level colleges. So the only way to really address that is to provide the additional resources, so we're teaching in smaller classes, in tutorial systems rather than massive lecture theatres, And the money announced today simply does not do that. It is not enough. I would prefer to have withdrawn one or two other threads and to put money into that to give a clear signal to the rest of the world. But more than anything else, I'd have to say there's a certain shock in the people in the environmental community as to the signal that went out today with regard to this government's attitude to climate change. And it shouldn't be a shock to us because we know we're battling this day in, day out. But it was the story around this carbon tax being pulled, it seems, at the last minute because the Independent Alliance were unhappy with it, and Fine Gael, similarly the same, took a political calculation that they would gain electorally from it rather than lose, that they pulled it. And I think that was a shocking decision. It's not that the carbon tax in itself was the key measure for us to take action on the issue. It's a useful tool, but it's only that. It's only one of many that we need to turn to. But the fact that it was dumped at the last minute in the way sends a signal which actually is a symbol of the government's entire outlook and approach to the whole climate change issue. And the Minister's argument that we need to do further research, I'll be honest, really stuck in the craw, because this is the day after there was an international report that could not have been more clear. He must have been making his decision at the same time if he was listening to the news or reading any newspaper of note that actually the alarm call was firing. And Fine Gael have hit the snooze button and said, we don't care in that decision. And it was the same day, if he wants economic analysis, the same day that the Nobel Prize for Economics was awarded to William Nordhaus, who's an expert, who's been writing for years on how you introduce a carbon tax. There's no shortage of research to show how you do this. It would have been very easy to have that done over the summer months, and it was done by the Department of Finance. The Tax Strategy Group produced the paper. We don't need that much significant additional analysis. I was glad to hear the Minister on the radio this evening say, well, he really wants to go to €80 a tonne. But waiting for 2030 to do that and putting off the day when we start to take action on climate change is going to cost us all dearly. It's a terrible mistake. He could have read the work that John Fitzgerald and Sue Scott and other notable economists have done here more than 10, 15 years ago, showing how you apply a carbon tax, showing that if you redistribute the money in investing in clean technology solutions and in retrofitting people's homes to make them energy efficient and making sure that you address the issue of fuel poverty, it has a net economic benefit. This is good for the economy. The analysis has been done. We've done it before. We know how to do it. It could have been done at the flick of a switch, at the stroke of a pen, and at the same time Fine Gael, because they don't care about climate change, said, nah, we leave that out. Because Shane Ross wanted it, whose only other thread in this budget seems to be the Granny Flat grant, which I understand now, latest breaking news, is a single granny in Clondalkin who's going to benefit from this whole new approach. That's a dramatic win for the Independent Alliance, along with their scuppering of climate change action. The Minister says in his speech that he wants to put back to the Climate Committee, which I'm working on, very glad to be part of. I think it's doing hugely important and interesting work. Can I advise anyone who maybe wants to follow it, just to start by going back to look at what Mary Donnelly, former head of renewables and energy efficiency in the European Commission, who presented us 3 weeks ago, a superb example of how if you had an attitude of opportunity around this, and actually ambition and endeavour and willingness to take risks and make mistakes and think big, this is doable and good for our country. In practical outlined measures, she outlined what we could and should be doing, starting by stopping the use of fossil fuels in any Irish home, in any public building straight away, and not, like in everything Fine Gael are doing, put it off for another 10 years. We've also had presented to us the clear facts of the scale of the challenge that we're facing. The modelling, and you can't be exact about modelling, but the best analysis we have from the EPA and others, SEAI, is that in the next 10 years, we need to reduce our emissions in areas like transport, agriculture and domestic energy down to about 400 million tonnes over that 10-year period. And we know that with all the measures and all the additional things government's saying they're going to do, but they're not really going to do, but even if you accepted all those, we're looking at 500 million tonnes emissions. We're looking at 100 million tonnes extra that we have to cut now. Now, we might make half of that by buying our way out, using all sorts of funds and all sorts of loopholes that the government have negotiated with the European Union. But even if we used every single one of those, we still have a 50 million tonne gap. And I'll be honest with you, it is frightening and scary when we've been asking the public officials in those committees as to how they want to close that gap, and they look like rabbits caught in the headlights, not knowing what to say or what to do. And even more frighteningly, we've just published a National Development Plan, Project Ireland 2040, which the officials openly admit there was no climate assessment done of before it was agreed. How could that have been done in 2018 when the issue and the urgency around climate change was so clear? How did our political and public administrative system allow a country which is already ranked second worst next to Poland in the European Union allow a sign-off on a national development plan that was not fit for climate purpose, which is the direction that our economy has to go in? So what could we do? Well, we could today have listened to the advice of the ESB at that Climate Action Committee, which said we need something like 25 million maybe this year on investing in high-speed electric vehicle charging points. There's all this talk in the National Development Plan, we're going to have 500,000 electric vehicles within 12 years, but there was not a word today in what the state might do to help make that happen. We might take the advice of Professor John Fitzgerald, who also, in his presentation to the committee, said we should be spending €5 billion on our social housing stock to improve them, make them energy efficient, and help those people create cosy homes and get them out of fuel poverty. That could have been started and launched today. It'll take 10 years to ramp it up, but we should have started today with a new scheme, not just continuing the old schemes, which were about small retrofitting purposes. We need to think big. We are going to get rid of fossil fuels in a generation. This is not twinkling around the edges. This is system change we need. There was none of that in the budget today. And the National Development Plan says, oh, we're going to have 45,000 houses done by 2020, a year by 2021. When in truth, we're in the flat grant territory. There's only a handful being done this year. That's the reality. That's why I slightly scoffed and said shame when the Minister said, oh, we're going to meet our 2030, we're going to have massive reductions in our emissions. It's not backed up by the reality of what's happening in the ground. If we were really ambitious, in our housing section, and the housing section I haven't even started to talk about the absence of any discussion about cost rental housing as the reformative change that I've heard so many deputies here on this side, and I know in their heart of hearts some Fine Gael deputies also understand that actually it's the change. It's not just, oh, we've met these figures and we're keeping the current system going and we're going to boost the figures. We want to change the system, and there's none of that. Well, we could have also changed our housing by saying and putting aside money for every single school or every single public building that we're going to put solar panels on them as part of this budget 2019 in response to the call from the IPCC yesterday. Not a word on that energy transition was heard today. In transport, it's even worse. Again, in the Climate Committee, what we heard, there is not a single major public transport project in construction in Ireland today. With the exception of Royal Canal Greenway, there's not a single cycling project in construction today. And there's an announcement, oh, we're increasing transport spending. Yes, we are, in yet more roads. And people I'm sure who are driving the N4 must think it's great, that's going to be upgraded, but it's heading towards a Dublin which is gridlocked and where we're planning to take out people's front gardens to try and cope with all those cars. And there's no vision as to how we could have a different system based on public transport, walking and cycling, which was set out in the National Planning Framework as what we need to do, was then ignored in the National Development Plan and ignored even more here today in the budget. So there's no public transport projects being built this year. There will be none next year either. And while I'd love to see the Bus Connects project as promised in the budget today take place, and those cycling projects say they're going to start designing, we all know that cut in the carbon tax was reflective of an utter lack of commitment within this wider Dáil, I'd have to say, for that change, and that's the problem. In agriculture, I was glad last week, did I hear for the first time ever, the Chief Executive of Teagasc recognising the reality that actually to meet our climate targets and to start play our part, we would have to start considering changing tack and moving away from this policy of doubling everything, doubling dairy and massively expanding beef and massively expanding high emissions agriculture. And I'm absolutely convinced that the alternative, the greener approach to agriculture, is actually going to pay Irish farmers better. And I think they're starting to know that too. I think they're starting to see that the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy will allow us to start paying farmers properly for storing carbon and for managing water and maintaining its quality and for protecting biodiversity and to allowing access to our land as well as providing high quality food. And the current system is not working. It may work for about 15,000 farmers, but the other 120,000 are below poverty levels in their wages and are ageing without the young generation coming forward to take their shoes. We need to transform Irish agriculture to give young people a sense that that is actually the future. They're the people we're going to pay well. They're the people we're going to see at the front line of climate change action in this country. And they're ready and able and will be brilliant at doing it, but they need a bit of leadership, they need a bit of direction from government. They will not get that from Fine Gael. And yes, there's promise here, money for forestry, but there's no mention or no thought about changing the nature of forestry. That IPCC report was right. We're going to have massive amounts of new forestry to store to try and avert this runaway climate change disaster that is unfolding before us. Now, we have to do that in a way that just isn't about repeating the same monoculture, clear fell, short rotation, single crop, Sitka spruce everywhere. We should be setting ourselves the goal, ambition of filling our people with a sense of hope and inspiration that we're going to create forests that are a joy to walk through, that bring tourists to this country, that protect wildlife, that provide really high quality timber. It may take another 50 years, but we have to think in response to this in that sort of time frame. And there's none of that in Fine Gael. Now, some people might say, why should we do it? Why heed the warning when the Americans and the Brazilians now or others are not following suit? And you could actually point to every country. No one's particularly good at this at the moment. That's the really frightening thing. The Germans, who everyone thought were brilliant with the Energiewende, are stuck now in their own coal lobby needs. The UK beside us had a lot of early quick wins, and they were great on diplomacy, but they similarly don't exactly have a clever energy policy yet. We're not alone. We're not the worst. We're not laggards. Fine Gael are the laggards, but the country and the Irish people are ready and willing and able to do their bit. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But they need a government which helps them and which shows a lead. Mary Robinson was right what she said yesterday morning. I don't know if you heard her, Minister. Very simple point she was making, that we do this because it makes us human. We do this because when we build a town or a city or a neighbourhood or a community where the walker and the cyclist is the king, actually you create a social transformation. You get a better space. I'm old enough to remember what it was like on those streets back in the 60s and early 70s before all the cars came. It is more human. It is socially richer. And similarly in energy, when we start putting that solar panel on everyone's roof and the heat pump out the back and the electric vehicle in the front, and they're balancing and trading and creating their own power, that's empowering to us as human beings. And when we create a landscape which every single county, every single acre, every single parish, every valley is special and is the front line of the transition, this is not the great advantage of this change, this tackling this climate change project, is that it belongs to everyone, the response. It belongs to every political party, not to one, certainly not ours. We need to spread this as a belief that we can and should do this. And we do it because it's special everywhere. It creates an urban environment that is special. It creates a rural environment that is special. Everywhere is part of it, because we're all part of the one integrated system that has to rise to this incredible challenge that we have. We should be urgent green in everything we do, and we should do that for real, not just as a marketing ploy. And if we do so, it weaves a cloth that is embroidered with dreams. It gives us a sense of purpose, a sense of specialness as a country. We can and will be leaders in this. But we won't do it if we balk every time it comes to making a hard decision. We won't do it if we're afraid of making mistakes, and we'll make mistakes. It's going to be difficult. But in making mistakes, you will be at the forefront of the industrial revolution that is happening. This is the better economy as well as a more humane society that comes out of it. This is the way the world is going. This is the way investment is going. As a sign minister, I just heard this evening we're about to launch our bond tomorrow, our green bond. Very much welcome it. Another thread that would give you hope. And talking to the people in the bonds market, they say the reason they're doing this is because that's where the new economy is going. That's where the money is. That's what people want. That's what people expect a modern, enlightened, forward-thinking country to be. And it'll be at a lower interest rate than if we were trying to raise money in the old fossil fuel economy. And we'll be able to tap into it because we in Ireland are good at this transition. We're brilliant at balancing renewable power on a grid. We're good at efficiency. Our industry is relatively clean. Irish farmers are superb in managing their land if they've given the chance and the signals to do it in a way where they're properly rewarded for storing carbon. Irish people are just as ambitious and just as keen to make this transition as anyone, if not, I think more so. Because we're still a decent country with decent people who are willing to do the right thing. And in this budget, at this day, in this time, that would have been taking climate seriously. Thank you.